This week was crazy. We got two records broken, and of course, one thing we like to talk about is the Panthers. Can we stop talking about them, please? Oh no, they only won by 80. This is Sports Hour. As I said, this was a absolute crazy week. The biggest things that came out here were that there were several things that shouldn't have happened that did. There were some underdog victories this week, and it's quite impressive to see that these things actually worked. I mean, I lost the real sheets. I mean, it was crazy for some of these because the context is it's just because some of the teams actually did really well, and some teams did not do well whatsoever. I went 11-5 this week in predictions. I don't know how I saved this much. We had quite a few pretty close games. So we had had some decent games that were fairly close. Like the game of the week was one. It was really close. The Falcons and Saints game was really close. The Athen and Werewolves game was too close. It was ended up being a tie. Right, but then and then the Bobcats and ours game all were really close. But then there were a lot of pretty big overcomes. Like for example, at the beginning of the week, I remember you said that the Superman were predicted to lose game one. This first game, the Stars were predicted up by 2. Yeah, they got demolished in that game. It wasn't even close. That was one of the few games I got correct. I just had to go with what it is. It was also because Sarah Nova, one of the team players from Superman, ended up getting, and she's a rookie for this one, ended up getting a huge. She broke the rookie record with the most amount of 4-point shots made. And 4-point shots are not in any of the NBA series. They're only in the NBL. And basically the only difference is how far away is a shot. It is huge just in it. She got 6 4-pointers, which sets the NBL rookie record. It's not the record officially. The record currently is 7, and I hold that one, luckily. And that was an absolute huge. But she did a really good job, and she scored 47 points, which is huge compared to a lot of the other teams. Of course, we had to talk about the Panthers because the Panthers end up starting week 1 off of a huge. Panthers absolutely demolished well, let's just say they weren't demolishing. They both did really well in the context sense. It's just the Panthers went up and got 80 points more than the Knights did. And the thing is, this is actually they played each other a lot. This is the 49th time they played. They'll play the 50th time later this season. And it's just something that came huge. The Athen and Werewolves tied. They're in the same division. Because ties are a little bit more common now, it's a little bit more likely that they actually would tie. They were at 99-99 at the end of the regulation, and then they only scored 2 points total to make it so it was a tie game at that point. So it was really interesting. It was really interesting. I went 11-5. I'm tied with Dog right now. The other person thing, it's both of us have 5, and I did decently this week. I got a few wrong, I got a few right that some people didn't get right. So we'll see how that works from this one. As for the divisions, current leaders, Panthers are currently leading, although they are pretty close to being the leads for. Legends are pretty close to being the leads for that. Cardinals did well as well, even though they weren't supposed to do well. Ravens, Foxes, and Tigers are all pretty close in positions. Indians currently lead. That's the first time they've ever led the division, by the way. Pirates are right behind them. Falcons and Angels have pretty close rankings for that. New England Cats are the only team that won in their division. Lynx and Otters both won their Lynx, Otters, and Lions both all won their games. They all are currently leading that division. And then we had the Beagles and Supermen and Huskies, which were all won. It was surprising for me that the Huskies even won that game because, Huskies are not necessarily a new team, but in the history of the NBL, any team that does change their name going into a season doesn't do well. So they got lucky week 1, and maybe this is just going to be a good game for them. The Colts and Texans are the leaders of the current, although the Celts look a lot better than the Texans do. All right, let's get into week 2, my picks for week 2. There's a lot of predictions. There are a lot of heavily favored games this week. We have the Dogs facing off the Tigers. It's a +2 in that game. They're telling me the answer now. It is Tigers. Everyone's favor of the Tigers except for it's a pretty split. I had to choose very differently for this one. This is going to be a tough one for me. And in my prediction, it's going to be so tough. But I'm going to pick the Tigers this week. I think the Tigers do have a slightly better edge against the Dogs. And then we have the Knights and the Bears. We have the Kings and the Bears. Everyone's picked the Kings this one. I feel that it's going to be a very close game in this regard because they're just super intense. This could be another one of those games that ends up being a tie. Plus, one is not really a great prediction. I am going to pick the Kings here, but I do think the Bears are going to put up a really good fight. Both these teams are in a great position. And, of course, if you look at the back of the Kings here, the Kings are not exactly a very good offense, but have a great defense. Bears have a kind of a bad defense and decent offense. So, honestly, it looks to me that they're going to do a little better. I think the defense is going to hold out for the Kings. We have the Colts and the Chargers. Did we fill that in? No. They're filling in as they do it. They picked CO. They picked CO. It is going to be a very interesting week, and they've already put theirs in as well. But it's going to be an interesting week. CH is the other one. C is Chargers. CO is Colts. In the context here, this is going to be an interesting game. The Colts are pretty heavily favored in this one. Unfortunately, I have to say, the Chargers still have not shown me what they actually need to do. The Chargers have a pretty bad defense, and they're not great in offense, versus the other portion where we have the Colts, who did win their game, and they are much better in offense. They do have decent defense. I have to go in here and say, give me that anymore. I'm going to say, in week 2 predictions, I have to go with the Colts. And I do not want to do that right now. In this one, I think it's going to be a very interesting game. Moving to the Jets and the Lions. Everyone's picking the Jets. And honestly, I do think the Jets do have a very good chance of actually winning this game. But the problem with the Jets right now for me is they're not showing up the full game. And looking back at the Jets' power rankings, Jets are 10th versus the Lightning, who have a much better power rankings, which power rankings just means the context of where they are. I'm going to say the Jets do have a good chance of winning this game, but I'm going to go with the Lightning this week because of the context. I think the Lightning do have a slightly better team overall. Lightning are not great at any of those things, but the Jets aren't very good either. I think both these teams are good. I think the Jets do have a better defense, but I think that it's going to be just 1 week. I think the Jets lose this week. We got the Lynx and the Otters. Game of the week has not been determined. They're telling me that they're trying to tell me that right now. The Lynx and Otters is just tough. I have to say this is a very interesting week. Otters won their game in overtime, and the Lynx won their game in overtime. So, I mean, or not overtime, but close to overtime. This is super close. This is so close. And honestly, I don't know. The thing is, look back at League 1, Lynx and Otters, Lynx and Warriors, Lynx were struggling most of that first part of the game. And if they're struggling, they're going to have a hard time in this one. The Otters were not struggling the entire game. They kept going. I have to go with the Otters here, winning this game. And that's what he went with as well. John went with as well. Well, okay, Knights and Legends. Knights are really low blow underdogs. They got blown out against the Panthers. We just know that had to happen. I think all of us have to say Legends was a pretty fair basis from this one. If you're favored by 28, I don't think there's any chance that the Knights are going to be able to come in. The Knights just don't have enough yet. They might do better later in the season, but the fact is the Legends at least won their game against a pretty decent opponent. But, well, they still won by a lot. In this case, I don't think the Knights are going to be able to do it, especially if they can't really handle it. They did well against the Panthers, but not well enough to be able to beat the Legends off this one. We had the Foxes and the Panthers, which is the game of the week. Not really surprised about that one. Everyone's going with the Foxes. The Foxes are favored in this game. It's tough. Last time these two teams, the Panthers did win, but that was only one. They've only faced one time in the entire innings. Panthers won that game. It was a very close game. Looking at who they played last week, the Foxes. And looking this correctly here, Foxes played against the Hawks. Not really that great of a team. So the Hawks have just been struggling. They have I think it's going to be a very tough position to be able to go for the Hawks. And anyways, Hawks are favored by 4 in that game. They're favored by a lot more in that instance. They're only favored by 4 in this game, 3 in this game. But Panthers did absolutely show that they do have what it takes. I'm going to go with Panthers this week. I do think this is going to be a much closer game than we respect, which is why this is game of the week. And John went with the Panthers as well. Bobcats and UNC. Bobcats are favored by 11 in this one. And honestly, I think that's 100% correct. If you look back at what Bobcats did last week, Bobcats did really well and played very well with the Otters versus UNC, the other team who did not really show up at all. It's definitely going to have to be the Bobcats that win this game, and everyone's picked them at this week. Hawks and Ravens. It is a mixture between the games. This is a tough one. Ravens are heavily favored. It's not tough whatsoever. Ravens are winning this one. Dog and puppy are going to go down a week because there's no chance that the answer. Now it could be one of those games like against those games that this happens. The underdogs happen to do really well, but as of right now, I don't see the Ravens losing against this team. Pirates and Saints. This is actually a heavily favored for the Pirates. Everyone's going with the Pirates. John's going with the Pirates. Should I go with the Pirates here? Well, I'm looking at the rankings because the rankings were the biggest position that really mattered for me. They're ranked 2 in defense. Their offense is not as great. Then we look at the Saints, who are 15th and 26. So yeah. East is going to be a tough one, and I do think it's going to be a very much closer game than what it is. It's not going to be 23 points apart. I'm going with. Oops, I didn't do that. I think I'm going to have to go with this one this week for the Pirates to win that game, but I do think it's going to be a much closer game at 23 points. Dragons and Falcons. Dragons are favored by 1 in that game. It's going to be a very close game. Falcons took a really good game. Dragons lost, and they are not exactly a good offense. They have a decent defense. But the Falcons' apps are much better in offense and they don't have a terrible defense. Unfortunately, it's going to be a variance. I have to say the Dragons are not going to hit here. I'm going to go with the Falcons winning this game, and apparently everyone doesn't agree with me. All right, we got the Indians and Bulldogs. It is tough to say at least, but looking at what happened last week for the Indians and Dragons faced off, and the Dragons lost by a few. They actually did pretty well to come in this one, but the problem with the Dragons is I don't know if they can keep this up. And the fact is, even though that happened, the Bulldogs did only lose by a few points as well. Even though I have to say this is a tough one. I am going to give the underdogs in this one the favorites. Well, I think is actually the underdogs. I'm going to give the Indians the favorites. I know the Indians are favored by a little bit here, so they're not actually underdogs, but it's a pretty close game for me. It's pretty split. Angels and Browns. This is a pretty interesting week because Angels beat the Bulldogs by a few points. They beat by 9. So they didn't do great. They didn't do terrible. Versus the Browns, who last week kind of were disappointments. They actually were supposed to win that game. They didn't. They didn't win that game, and that's the problem with me. I do not think the Browns have what it takes to win this game. It is going to be the Angels to take this one. Everyone thinks the Angels. All right, we get the Beagles. The Beagles and the Dolphins. Beagles are favored by 20. Yeah, this is not going to be fun. Looking at the Beagles are fifth in offense right now, tied for fifth in offense, and then they also have pretty good defense. As for the other one, the Dolphins, they just could not have picked a worse week. They lost, which is not really, they didn't do terrible, but they're not terrible in offense. Defense is not great either, or not terrible either. But they needed to score or do a lot better. This is a tough one for me. I'm going to favor with the Beagles here, and Dolphins apparently has what John thinks. Werewolves and the Packers. Werewolves tie one of the only two names. Werewolves are favorites in this game by 11. Okay. The thing is, if you looked back at the last week where the Werewolves tied, they got 101 points. Packers last week only lost by a few to the Lions. This is a tough week, and I'd say this could have easily been the game of the week as well. Except that this is a very, very going to be. I think it's going to end up being a lopsided game. Everyone thinks the Werewolves. John thinks the Packers are going to win this game. And honestly, this is going to be a tough one for me to even pick. I mean, looking at how the Packers have done it, they're kind of in the middle for offensive defense versus the Werewolves, who are kind of in the middle as well. So this is actually could be very much the position that matters. I'm going to go with the Werewolves here, but I think this is going to be a much closer game than we might think. Warriors and the Texans. Okay. Texans favored by 7. Warriors put up a good. We're winning by a lot in that. We're winning for a long time in that game, in their game. And the Texans winning their game the entire time. UNC just didn't pull up a fight. I think it's going to be a great game. I'm sorry. It's going to be the Texans that win this game. And he doesn't think, and John doesn't think so, but that is, I think, is going to be a game. I think, honestly, this could be the week to decide whether the Warriors or the Texans are actually good. One of them is going to probably lose, but yeah. Cardinals and the Stars. Okay, Cardinals are favored by 27. I don't think we have to say much here. Everyone's going to pick the Cardinals in this game, and yes, that's correct. Stars disappointed us. They got crushed by the Supermen. The Supermen weren't supposed to be good. And honestly, this is not going to be a fun week for me to say that the Cardinals are going to be it. That's the thing about the Cardinals. Currently are third in the league. They're 8th in offense. They're not great in defense, but honestly, who knows? I think the Cardinals do win this week. I don't think the Stars are going to show up at all. Stars only got 73 points last week. They had the second lowest of all the teams in the NBL. So, yeah. Lowest amount of scores in the NBL. The UNC was the only team that scored lower than them, and yet they still kind of didn't do too well for that. Cardinals win this one. Huskies and Supermen. This is going to be a very good game. Huskies are going to be fighting very well. Supermen are favored by 26. This is a tough one. John thinks the Huskies. This is a really tough one because I actually think the Huskies did really well this last week. Huskies end up being a pretty decent team and actually were underdogs in that game. They're heavily underdogs in this one. In my opinion, this is going to be a super tough week. to pick, I'm going to go. I really think Supermen are going to do really well in this one, but I think the Huskies are going to surprise us. I think they're going to be heavy underdogs, which means they're going to go up several points in the power rankings. I'll explain how power rankings work in a second here. Then we got the Giants and the Leland Cats. Leland Cats favored by 32. Don, why are you going with them? Now, Leland Cats are going to win this one. Leland Cats are one of those teams that's going to be heavily favored, and they're heavily favored for a reason. They beat the Jets pretty badly versus the other team, which was the Giants, who lost by quite a bit. They were underdogs in that game too. So, yeah, the Giants are gonna lose this one. It's gonna the next game is gonna be the Lions and okay. This is a tough one. Yes, the Lions are favored by 11. Last week they beat the Packers, but they only beat them by a few points, which is what was supposed to happen anyways. And then the eighth ended up tying against the Werewolves. This is tough. It's a split game for me. I am going to go with the Lions because I do think the Lions are going to have a slightly better record for this. But I do think the chances are here that this is going to be a much better game than we think. I think this is going to be a very close game. This game's going to probably go to overtime. All right. Now, I didn't explain power rankings in week 1. And I'm going to explain it real quickly in this week because this is how the predictions are decided. This is why there's so many heavily favored games. We go ahead and go to that one. Is it showing? I don't know if it's showing or not. No. Let me open it. These are how they favor units. So you can see the power rankings. It is off of what they are predicted to do. So if they were predicted to go wins, if they were predicted to win all their games, in theory, because then they get their start. That's where they start their position. So for example, the eighth are still going to be at that position. If they win, and they win by 25, they go up 1 point. If they win, they go up by 1 point. So there's a couple things. If they win, it doesn't matter. If they win, they go up by 1 point. Either way. If they win by a heavily win, that means 25 or more, they go up by 2 points. If they heavily win and they were underdogs, that means they were supposed to lose, they go up by 3 points. If they lose, they go up by 1 point. If they tie, they get no points added to the record. The current rankings are that the Lynx are number 1 in the league, and you can see all of them here. This one, I believe, is available to you guys as well. So you guys can see everything. You can also see all the scores up to this week as well. This is all the predictions for what the predictions for every team is. So that's it. And you can see the power rankings. Power rankings are in red. So everything else is in green for that one, so you can see it. And if a team does change, I'm going to go in and get rid of these now because I've already updated the power rankings. For this week. If they go up, and I'm not really going to worry about last position because there's just no real reason to have it. But if they go up, eventually they're going to get a position wherever their last position was. So every 2 weeks, I'll look at that as saying, okay, they were at this position the last week. This is where they are now. And I will say this: this isn't really mean much, but this decides a lot of what happens in it. Because what happens to decide the predictions, I'll go back to this thing here. Also, it is the total amount. We look at their ends. This is the now points they have. So, for example, if we're looking at the Lions, they have 27 points. Then I look at their power rankings. Or look at the other team they're playing. Let's say they're playing the Warriors. So then that means that they have 27 and they have 40. So the official starting prediction would be 27 minus 40. Then I look at the power rankings for each one of these, and those amounts are removed from this. So if you go to the power rankings right here, the power rankings for the Lions right now, I have to go find them because they're not easy to find, were 4. So it's a 4-point difference. And then I have to add the other teams, which is the Warriors. That tells me the actual favorite. Whatever happens, what's the actual favorite? It is not that difficult to figure out. It's just the context of I have to do it every week, and this is actually interesting to see. That's how some of these teams are so heavily favored. I mean, are heavily favored in some of these games. We're gonna have. It'll be interesting to see how these weeks work. Obviously, some of these games are closer than others. Angels are much closer than everything else, and the Foxes are probably the closest game is the Lynx and the Otters. That's it for Sports Hour. Thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video. Don't forget to keep your game on, and I'll see you in the next video.